Greetings, everyone. My name is Henry. This is a story about how 13 years of my marriage turned to ashes because of one accidental discovery. Life knows how to deliver surprises at the most unexpected moments. What happened to me on an ordinary Sunday completely changed my perception of the past and of the woman with whom I had been building plans for the future for more than a decade. Everything fell apart on Sunday, at around 4:30 in the afternoon. I remember that moment precisely because I just looked at the clock on the cable box, thinking that there were still a couple of hours left before my sister Virginia arrived for dinner. I was sitting in the living room, half listening to a basketball game broadcast on television. My wife had been next to me on the couch just a few minutes earlier, scrolling through her phone. Then she got up and went to the kitchen to start cleaning up. From there came the sounds of her movements, the clinking of dishes being stacked, and the noise of running water from the faucet. She looked beautiful that day. She was wearing one of my old university t-shirts, which she had claimed for herself many years ago. Her hair was tied up in a careless ponytail. She seemed so domestic and familiar, exactly the girl I had fallen in love with 15 years ago, when we were young, stupid, and believed we understood how this world worked. I remember thinking how lucky I was, and what a strong, reliable union we had built over 13 years of living together. That feeling of happiness lasted only 5 minutes. While I was watching the game, my gaze fell on Virginia's phone, which was lying on the side table next to the couch. The device was connected to the charger, and suddenly the screen lit up with an incoming notification. I usually don't look through her things. We always had an open and trusting relationship. We knew each other's passwords and had free access to each other's devices, not out of control or suspicion, but because we had nothing to hide. At least, that's what I thought. The message came from her sister, Linda, who was planning to visit us in the evening. On the locked screen, a fragment of the text appeared saying that she was running late and might only arrive after dinner because of traffic or errands with the kids. I picked up the phone to read the full text. Virginia needed to know this so that she could adjust our evening plans. If Linda was going to be late, we could move the meal by an hour or so. I unlocked the device by entering the familiar 4 digits that my wife had been using for years. The message indeed mentioned traffic jams on the highway and her son's protracted soccer practice. Nothing suspicious. I was about to lock the screen and put the phone back, but something made me pause. I don't know if it was a premonition or just an absurd coincidence, but an inner voice told me to keep looking. I opened the messenger and started scrolling through recent conversations. There were the usual contacts, our constant exchanges about shopping and what time I would come home from work, the chat with Linda, messages from her mother who lived in another state, and a group with her university friends. Everything looked completely ordinary, exactly what you would expect to see on a wife's phone. And then I came across a thread that made my insides clench. The contact was labeled Mr. David. David was her boss, the CEO of the marketing agency where she had been working for the last 5 years. I knew him only superficially. We had met at a couple of corporate parties, exchanged handshakes, and had empty conversations about sports, weather, or company business. He seemed like a typical representative of the corporate environment. Self-confident, impeccably dressed, a man who knew how to win over an audience. Virginia sometimes mentioned him, usually complaining about tight deadlines or rejoicing at the successful completion of joint projects. I never paid attention to that. Why should I have doubted? She could have professional relationships with a supervisor. However, the existence of personal correspondence outside of work groups or common chats seemed like a red flag to me. I opened that conversation. At first, I tried to convince myself that they were discussing work matters, coordination of meetings, or client issues. But as I scrolled through the messages, which spanned the last 6 months or even more, it became clear this was not work. There was not a single word about presentations or deadlines. It was about meetings after work, about hotels whose names I did not recognize, and about how exciting and dangerous it all was. Virginia's replies hurt even more because they were in her characteristic writing style, the same emojis she sent to me. She wrote about how her husband, that is, me, was working late, and that they could meet at that place he had mentioned. I kept scrolling through the chat, even though every word pierced my heart like a knife. Some photos were so explicit that I felt physically ill. Just 15 feet away from me, in the kitchen, Virginia was humming to herself over the sound of running water while washing dishes. She did not even suspect that I now held undeniable evidence of her betrayal in my hands. I wanted to burst in there, throw the phone in her face, and scream until I lost my voice. I craved answers. I wanted to ask how she could do this to me, to us, to our 13 years of marriage. I needed to know when it started, why, and whether she had ever loved me at all, or whether our entire life together had been nothing but a lie. But I did nothing. Something held me back. Perhaps it was the shock. My brain simply refused to comprehend what I had seen. Or maybe it was a survival instinct, suggesting that confronting her right then, without a clear plan and a cool head, would be a mistake. I carefully locked the phone and put it back on the charger, exactly in the same position it had been in. Then I went to the bathroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bathtub, trying to process everything. Were there signs that I had missed? I began to reconstruct the events of the past months, looking for clues that I had been too blind or too trusting to notice. Late returns from the office, new lace lingerie in her drawer that I had assumed was meant for me, her recent detachment, her constant immersion in her phone, her eternal fatigue and excuses when I initiated intimacy. I blamed it all on stress, high workload, and the fact that after 10 years of marriage, feelings settle into a calm routine. I thought of it as a normal stage for any couple. What a fool I was. How was I supposed to survive the next few hours without breaking down? The days following my discovery became the hardest in my life. I had to pretend everything was fine and act as if I knew nothing. It was pure torture. Every time Virginia kissed me before leaving for work or told me about her day, inventing another lie about overtime hours, I had to hold myself back. Inside, I was literally dying. However, I needed to act strategically, especially if I was planning a divorce. I thought long and hard about my options. In our state, the fact of infidelity could significantly affect the divorce process, particularly the division of assets and alimony payments. Virginia earned significantly more than I did. She held the position of senior executive director at her company with a six-figure annual income. My salary was decent, but much more modest. To end the marriage on fair terms, I needed solid evidence that could not be disputed in court. What I had seen on her phone was not enough. She could claim the messages were taken out of context, or simply delete the correspondence before I could document it. I needed irrefutable facts. So I decided to hire a private investigator. I saw no other way. I could not follow her myself because of my own work and obligations, and I probably would not have been able to do it professionally anyway. After researching online, I found a reputable agency and booked an appointment. The investigator was professional and understanding. He warned me that the investigation would take some time, possibly several weeks, and would not be cheap. I agreed and signed the contract, feeling that I was taking the first real step toward ending our marriage. While the professional did his job, I continued to observe my wife, trying not to arouse suspicion. I noted her delays, the evenings when she came home later than usual, and the weekends she supposedly spent at the office. I closely watched her mood and behavior. She acted as if nothing had happened, or she was simply a masterful actress, but a chasm had grown between us, at least from my side. I could no longer look at her the same way. A week after my initial discovery, I tried to look at her phone again, but I found that the password had been changed. That was another confirmation that she was aware of the risk and was actively covering her tracks. The waiting was agonizing. Each day stretched on endlessly. I immersed myself in work, trying to distract myself, but focusing was extremely difficult. I lost noticeable weight because I lost my appetite, and I almost stopped sleeping. I could not tell anyone the truth until I had decided on my next steps. Finally, after the longest few weeks of my life, the investigator called me. In his office, I received a thick envelope with the report. Taking a deep breath, I opened it. The contents were comprehensive and devastating. There were pictures of Virginia and David together, entering hotels, leaving restaurants, sitting in his car in parking lots. Each photo had a date and time stamp. A detailed timeline of their affair matched perfectly with the days when my wife claimed to be working late or attending work events. The evidence was undeniable. She could no longer make excuses or call it innocent interaction. She had been carrying on a full-blown affair with her boss for months, and now I had the proof. But the report contained something else, besides confirmation of the affair. The investigator had run a background check on David, and the results were quite interesting. David was married to a woman named Megan. They had been married for quite some time, and they had a family. The report contained brief information about her: age, biography, and interests. Megan was an artist, specifically a painter. Early in her career, she had achieved some success, but over time, she had almost stopped creating, probably to support her husband's career and raise their children. Based on some observations, the investigator noted that Megan seemed lonely and isolated. David was constantly busy with work, and her life, apparently, revolved around the needs of others rather than her own. Reading these details, I felt genuine sympathy for her. She was just as much a victim in this situation as I was. Her husband had betrayed her, just as Virginia had betrayed me. Megan deserved to know the truth about her husband's actions. I made the decision to contact her. The report contained her contact information, including an email address and phone number. Contacting her actually turned out to be much more difficult than I could have imagined. What words do you choose for a stranger when you are about to turn their familiar world upside down? How do you tell someone about a spouse's infidelity without seeming vengeful or crazy? I spent long hours drafting an email, deleting it, and starting over. In the end, I settled on a direct and compassionate version. I introduced myself, explained that I was married to one of David's colleagues, and wrote that I had information she needed to see. In the message itself, I did not go into detail. I simply asked if she would be willing to meet in person so I could share what I had found. I attached one or two of the less explicit photos from the private investigator's report to the letter, just enough to make it clear that this was serious. Then I hit send, before I could start doubting myself again. Megan responded a couple of days later. Her message was brief, but she agreed to meet. We arranged a time and place. I was not sure what to expect. Would she even believe me? But when I walked into the coffee shop and saw her at a corner table, I immediately realized that she was in a difficult state. We sat down, and I laid out the entire situation for her in detail. I showed her the full private investigator's report, explained exactly how I had learned about the affair, and answered all her questions as honestly as I could. Megan listened in silence, only occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly just absorbing the information. I could see unbearable pain in her eyes, but I also understood that what she saw was not a complete surprise to her. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, not taking her eyes off her coffee cup. Then she looked at me and said words I will never forget. She said that she thought she had known for a long time. She just had not wanted to believe it. Megan told me about her marriage, about how David had become more and more distant over the years, how he was always working and was too busy for her and their family. She said she had felt invisible in her own life, as if she meant nothing at all. Hearing that was unbearable, because I understood her feelings exactly. We talked for a very long time that day, sharing our stories, our pain, and our fears about the future. By the time we left the coffee shop, we had exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. During the following weeks, Megan and I became a true support system for each other. We corresponded regularly and discussed our future plans regarding our spouses. It was comforting to have someone by my side who understood what I was going through and did not advise me to just get over it. Megan was brilliant, kind, and a much stronger woman than she gave herself credit for. As we got to know each other, I found myself genuinely caring about her well-being and wanting to see her happy and free again. When everything became completely clear, I consulted with a lawyer. I showed her the private investigator's report, detailed my findings, and asked for advice on how to proceed. The lawyer carefully reviewed all the evidence and told me that since Virginia earned significantly more than I did, I could expect compensation. She advised me to stick to a certain strategy, document every step, remain calm and composed, regardless of how Virginia reacted at the critical moment. She began preparing the divorce papers, but warned that it would take some time to get everything in perfect order. We wanted to make sure our case was flawless. While the paperwork was being prepared, something unexpected happened. One evening, Virginia came home from work and mentioned that one of her colleagues was having an anniversary party in the coming weekend. It was supposed to be a large celebration involving many employees from her company, and Virginia asked if I wanted to go with her as her date. Under normal circumstances, I probably would have made up some excuse to avoid it. I had never been a big fan of Virginia's corporate events with their small talk and networking. But this time, something made me think. I asked my wife who else was invited to the party. Trying to appear casual, she listed a few names, and then mentioned that her boss would be there as well. According to her, most of the leadership team had been invited. As soon as she said David's name, a plan began to form in my head. This was an opportunity, a chance to confront both Virginia and David in a public setting, to expose their affair in front of all their colleagues. It was bold, perhaps even reckless, but after weeks of living with the knowledge of their betrayal, after constantly pretending that everything was fine while I was literally dying inside, I wanted to act. I wanted to regain some control and dignity. So I answered Virginia that I would go with her. She looked surprised but pleased, probably thinking this was a good sign that I suspected nothing. Later that same night, I texted Megan and told her about the upcoming event. I explained that her husband David would be there, that Virginia expected me to show up as a loving spouse, and I shared my idea. What if Megan also came to that party? What if we showed up there together and let both David and Virginia know that we knew about their affair, and that we were not going to hide or be ashamed? It would be a public statement, a way to show our unfaithful spouses that they could no longer humiliate us. At first, Megan hesitated. She was worried about a possible scene, about what people would think, and about how it might affect David or their children. But I reminded her that it was David and Virginia who had made the choices that led to this moment. It was they who had betrayed us, carrying on an affair without any regard for their families. We were doing nothing wrong by simply coming to the party together. On the contrary, we were reclaiming our dignity. After thinking it over for a day or two, Megan agreed. We carefully coordinated our plan. The evening of Sandra's anniversary arrived, and I was on edge. Virginia and I were getting ready separately. She spent a lot of time on her hair and makeup, and the dress she chose perfectly accentuated her figure. She seemed excited, chattering about who would be there. I just nodded along, giving short answers and trying to contain my anxiety. The car ride was tense, at least for me. Virginia did not seem to notice anything. She spent most of the drive on her phone, probably texting David or checking work email. I wondered if she was coordinating with him so they could meet at the party without drawing attention. We arrived at Sandra's house around 7 in the evening. It was a nice suburban home with a spacious backyard where the celebration was taking place. There were string lights everywhere, tables with food and drinks, and about 50 or 60 people already there, chatting and laughing. I recognized some faces from previous corporate events that Virginia had dragged me to over the years. I grabbed a beer from the cooler and tried to blend in with the crowd, making polite small talk with a few people, nodding and smiling at the right moments. Virginia stayed close to me at the beginning of the evening, playing the part of a devoted wife. She held my hand, laughed at jokes, and introduced me to people I had never met before. I played along, keeping a neutral expression and waiting for the right moment. I spotted David quite quickly. He was standing at the other end of the yard, surrounded by a group of executives. At one point, he looked in our direction, and our eyes met for a brief second. He quickly looked away and returned to his conversation. I wondered if he knew that I was aware of his affair. Most likely not. Virginia had probably kept it to herself, not wanting to risk David panicking or ending the relationship. When Megan arrived, I excused myself and stepped away. I told Virginia that I needed to take an important work call and would be back in a few minutes. She barely paid me any attention, already deeply engrossed in conversation with other colleagues. I went to meet Megan. This was the moment we had been planning, and there was no turning back. I found Megan in her car and could immediately see how nervous she was. I opened the passenger door and looked inside. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. She nodded, but I saw fear in her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this, Henry," she said in a trembling voice. "What if this only makes things worse? What if people judge me? What if David—" I interrupted her, squeezing her hand. "Hey, listen to me. We are not doing anything wrong. They should be the ones who are ashamed, not us. We are simply going in together. That's all. They can't humiliate us anymore." She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and then nodded more confidently. "Okay," she said. "Let's do this." Megan got out of the car, and she looked beautiful that evening. She had dressed for the occasion, wearing a simple but elegant blue dress and high-heeled shoes. Her hair was down, and despite her nervousness, she walked with her head held high as we headed toward the party. As soon as we turned the corner and stepped onto the back patio, I immediately felt the atmosphere change. Conversations began to quiet down. People noticed us, noticed Megan walking beside me, and started whispering among themselves. I saw confusion on the faces of those who knew both couples as they began to understand what was happening. The whispers grew louder. Virginia saw me first. She was still standing near the snack table among her colleagues, her eyebrows furrowed in confusion, and then she saw Megan next to me. I watched as the color literally drained from her face, and her expression turned to shock. She knew who Megan was. She had probably seen her at corporate events before, knew she was David's wife, and now Megan was here with me. But all my attention was focused on David's reaction. He was still standing with his group of executives when he turned and saw us. His face went completely white, and I saw his jaw clench. He looked at Megan as if he had seen a ghost. Then his gaze shifted to me, and I saw realization hit him like a physical blow. He understood. He understood that I knew everything. He understood that Megan knew too, and he realized that the facade he had so carefully built was about to crumble right in front of everyone present. I led Megan straight to the drink table, which was very close to where David was standing. The group of executives around him fell completely silent, sensing that something significant was happening, feeling the tension they did not yet fully grasp. David's face turned red, and I could see his hands clenching into fists. It was obvious that he was desperately trying to contain his rage, not to cause a scene in front of all these people. I stopped right in front of him, with Megan next to me. I leaned close enough so that only he could hear me. My voice was calm and steady, almost casual. "She is amazing," I said softly, looking him straight in the eyes. "Thank you for being too blind to see it." David's reaction was immediate. For a second, I really thought he might take a swing at me, but he did not. He just stood there, unable to do anything, staring at me with undisguised hatred. The executives around us watched in stunned silence, clearly trying to figure out what they had just witnessed. At the other end of the yard, I saw Virginia. She understood perfectly well what all of this meant. She knew that her affair had now become public knowledge, at least for this group of people, and there was no longer any way to cover it up or hide it. After we got our drinks and spent a few minutes talking to each other, I did not stay to enjoy David's reaction or to see what Virginia would do. I had said what I needed to say, and now it was time to leave. I turned to Megan, offered her my arm, and we left the party together. We calmly walked through the house, went outside, and walked to her car. After she drove away, I did not go straight home. I was not ready to face Virginia, given that I had essentially abandoned her there alone. I did not have the strength for the inevitable explosion that awaited me, so I just drove around the city for a while. When I finally got home, it was late. I pulled into the driveway and saw that all the lights in the house were on. I knew that Virginia was waiting for me, and that she was probably furious. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and walked inside. As soon as I crossed the threshold, Virginia rushed at me from the living room. Her face was purple with rage, her eyes were blazing, and she started screaming at me before I could even close the door behind me. She was absolutely furious. Virginia demanded an explanation furiously. She wanted to know what I had been thinking, and how I had dared to humiliate her in front of all her colleagues. According to her, I had destroyed her career, her reputation, and everything she had worked for over many years. She accused me of being vindictive and trying to ruin her life, claiming that I had brought David's wife to a work event solely to shame her. My wife's voice trembled with rage. She used harsh language, called me a nothing, and promised that I would bitterly regret my actions. The stream of insults and accusations seemed endless. I just stood in the hallway, crossing my arms over my chest, letting her vent. I did not interrupt, did not try to make excuses, and did not react to her outbursts. I just waited. I had been preparing for this moment for several weeks, and I was not going to let her throw me off balance or make me lose my composure. After what seemed like an eternity, Virginia began to run out of steam. When she finally fell silent and silence returned to the house, broken only by her heavy breathing, I spoke. Looking her straight in the eyes, I said, "I know everything, Virginia. I know about you and David. I have known about your affair for several weeks now. I have all the evidence, photos, messages, receipts. I am done. Our marriage is over." My wife's face changed in an instant. She opened and closed her mouth but could not utter a sound. She looked as if I had just slapped her. All the anger instantly disappeared, replaced by shock and panic. She began to stammer, asking what I was talking about, but her voice was weak and unconvincing. She knew perfectly well what I meant. Virginia tried to say that I had misunderstood everything and that there was nothing between them, but I interrupted her sharply. I firmly asked her not to insult my intelligence by trying to deny the obvious. I told her that I had a full report from a private investigator, including photos of her and David together entering hotels. I had copies of their text messages. I knew about every lie she had told me, about every time she claimed to be working late. Virginia's legs gave way, and she sank helplessly onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. For a while she sat in silence, and I could see her frantically trying to figure out what to answer. Then she looked up at me, and her demeanor changed completely. The anger was gone, replaced by tears and despair. She began to cry and beg me not to do this. She promised to end the relationship with David immediately, offered to go to a family therapist and try to fix everything. She used every possible tactic. She cried, appealed to my conscience, reminded me of the years we had spent together, of our happy moments, and of why we had once loved each other. Virginia insisted that she still loved me, that David meant nothing to her, and that it had been just a stupid mistake that she deeply regretted. She swore to do everything she could to make amends, quit her job, cut all contact with her lover, and dedicate the rest of her life to me if I would just give her another chance. But I did not believe a single word. Looking at the woman I had lived with for so many years, I felt nothing but cold indifference. I quietly told her that I could no longer trust a person who had been carrying on an affair with her boss for months and lying to me every single day. She had made a fool of me, and now she was sorry only because she got caught and realized how much she could lose in the divorce. When she tried to object, I gestured for her to be quiet. I firmly stated that the divorce papers would be ready in 2 days, and my lawyer would contact her. Until then, I decided to stay in the guest room and no longer wished to discuss the matter. Virginia sobbed even harder and tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. She begged me to give her a chance to fix things, but I did not want to listen anymore. I turned around and went into the guest room, locking the door behind me. The marriage was destroyed, and strangely enough, along with the pain, I felt liberation. A few days later, as I had promised, Virginia was served with the divorce papers. After that, a long, messy, and emotionally exhausting process began. The court proceedings dragged on for several months, as both sides hired lawyers and argued over every detail. Virginia earned significantly more than I did, and thanks to the private investigator's evidence, photos, timelines, and receipts, she risked losing a substantial amount in the division of assets. My lawyer acted aggressively and strategically, using the fact of infidelity to secure favorable terms for the division of assets and the awarding of alimony in my favor. Virginia's lawyer tried to downplay the significance of the affair, arguing that it should not affect the financial side of things. But the evidence was too strong and undeniable. Virginia's career also suffered severe damage. Rumors of her affair spread through the company like wildfire after the incident at Sandra's party. Everyone knew about it. Wherever she went, she was followed by whispers and judgment. The professional reputation she had built for years was hopelessly ruined. She and David tried to act as if nothing had happened, but the damage was done. Human resources got involved, launching an official investigation into violations of corporate policy and conflicts of interest. And then what I might have expected happened. David betrayed Virginia. When the situation heated up, he began to distance himself from her and change the version of events to save himself. David claimed that Virginia had persistently pursued him and that he had repeatedly tried to end the relationship. He portrayed himself as the victim of a subordinate who did not understand the word no. It was an absolute lie and a cowardly attempt to keep his job. Unfortunately, it partially worked. David held a higher position, was a valuable employee, and had connections on the board of directors. The company chose to believe his version. Virginia was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation, while David got away with only a formal reprimand and mandatory ethics training. Virginia was devastated. She called me many times, crying and begging me to help her, to tell human resources the truth and expose David's lies. But I refused. I had no desire whatsoever to get involved in her work dramas or solve her problems. She had made her own choices, and now she had to face the consequences. Saving her career was no longer my responsibility. In the end, unable to bear the public censure and the sideways glances, Virginia resigned before the investigation was even completed. I did not feel joy at her misfortune, but I did not feel pity either. During this same time, Megan was going through her own divorce process. It was even harder for her because she and David had children together. The court battles over custody, alimony, and asset division were grueling. However, Megan turned out to be stronger than she had expected. She hired an excellent lawyer and did not allow David to intimidate or manipulate her. In the end, she achieved a fair settlement. She kept the family home, received a significant portion of the assets, and obtained primary custody of the children. David's reputation in social and professional circles also suffered noticeably, although he kept his job. My divorce was officially finalized several months after filing. That time felt like the longest in my life, but it was necessary for healing. Thanks to my lawyer's firm stance, I received even more than I had expected, a share of the joint assets and decent alimony for the next few years, which allowed me to maintain financial stability. Virginia, on the other hand, ended up in a much worse position. Having lost her high-paying job and paid me a substantial sum, she moved to a small apartment on the other side of the city, trying to start over with a clean slate. Throughout all of this time, Megan and I maintained a close connection. We were united by a shared experience of betrayal, and we became true friends. Many people around us assumed that our friendship had turned into a romance, which was understandable. We understood each other like no one else. A deep bond had indeed formed between us, but we were not in a romantic relationship. Perhaps someday that might change, but for now, we both needed time to heal and figure out who we were outside of our broken marriages. We agreed to remain friends, to give each other space to recover. I threw myself completely into my work, took on new tasks, and returned to hobbies I had once abandoned. I also started going to therapy, which helped me deal with the anger and grief. It was a difficult road, with moments of doubt and hard days when it felt like I would never recover from Virginia's actions. But gradually, I began to feel like myself again. Not the person I had been before, but someone stronger and more aware. Looking back, I regret nothing. I did what I had to do. I learned what I am capable of when everything falls apart, and I realized that I cannot just survive after severe trials, but truly thrive. If you are going through something similar right now, know this. You are stronger than you think. You will get through this. It will not be easy or fast, but you will make it out. Focus on yourself, protect your interests, and surround yourself with people who genuinely care about you. Do not be afraid to walk away from what can no longer be fixed. You deserve better. We all deserve it. Thank you for your attention. Until next time.